Welcome to FSHD Straight Talk, the podcast where we dive deep into living with FSHD. I'm your host, Tim Hollenback, and I'm on the journey with you. Having FSHD, I understand the challenges it brings to patients and their families. We're in this together, and this podcast is a space where we swap stories, share advice, and talk to experts to get the latest news. There's plenty to say about living with FSH muscular dystrophy, so let's get straight to it. Welcome to the FSHD Straight Talk show. I'm your host, Tim Hollenback, and I guess it's a show, it's a podcast, I don't know. All I know is sometimes it got me on YouTube, and you can find me on Spotify, and you can find me on social. So happy to be here as we enter into 2025. I hope your holiday season was great, whatever holiday that is that you celebrate. Hope you don't have to avoid the holidays. Man, sometimes I want to, but I didn't. I pressed forward. You can email me here at fshdradio@fshdsociety.org. Go ahead and find past episodes anywhere you find your podcasts, on Spotify, Google, I'm pretty sure on Apple, I think. I don't know. We're everywhere. And don't forget to like, share, tell your friends about, tell people that are in the community about this show. This is a show that we still want to be about the community, the people that are dealing with this disease. There's other podcasts out there perhaps that deal with FSHD. Some talk about science. Some ramble on about themselves perhaps. I do a little bit of that also, but it's really about you. I get fantastic compliments from people, and I like getting compliments. However, this show is not about me. This show is about you. I'm a we before me kind of guy, and this podcast is definitely what that is. It's trying to bring people in the community to sit with me, talk about their stories, share what they do despite having FSHD. In the new year, I think we all need kind of maybe that refresher. For whatever reason, us as humans, that's what we do. And in 2025, we bring in some great episodes. And one of these this year to start off the year is Lucienne Ronco. It's going to be on today. Those that don't know, she is the Chief Science Officer of the FSHD Society. She has come into the space with us because we have other chief science officers in the past, but it seems like the shift in the science has been more about treatments. How are they attacking DUX4? She mentions in our conversation like 8 or 9 mechanism approaches, I believe, is her way of putting it. And that's exciting. Kind of like saying, hey, shots on goal. We've heard that before. And they're looking for different ways to attack the disease because it is so complicated. She talks about what could things look like in 5 years? And there's a lot of hope in there. And I don't think it's false hope. Sometimes false hope or that like, gee whiz, everything's great and fine, just ignore it. That's kind of toxic type positivity. It's not that at all. Lucienne speaks very clearly about the struggles of Fulcrum's downfall to some degree of the failure of Losmapam Mod. But we seem to kind of shift it into maybe that's a fail forward moment because Lucienne talks about that data being shared and what that really does mean in the space of science for this. She talks about working with Fulcrum, being emotionally affected by that failure, yet where we are now and what she has done, she's overcome, I believe, and is helping our community. I think that's what we all have to do. At the end of the episode, I'm going to explain a little bit too about how do you attack your new year? How do you decide, hey, I'm going to be a little bit different, a little bit better? And I'm going to challenge you at the end to kind of help yourself, kind of give a little bit of a tool that I've been using. So that's also at the end of the episode. I hope you can stick it out to hear me give that little spiel because I think it's helpful. And the biggest things I really want you to listen for, is those 8 and 9 possible attacks here. Shots on goal, as we said. That's exciting. She talks about Avidity and what they're doing. She names about 4 or 5 different pharmaceutical companies that are attacking within the space and excited to join that fight. And of course, the most important piece I really wanted to cover when we talked in this episode was the early onset community. I kind of asked Lucienne very frankly, like, are they being forgotten? What are we doing about this? How are they getting in clinical trials? And she answered those questions, phenomenal, because I kind of put her on the spot because it still needs to be talked about. And I know more is being done. But we get a little bit of an update on that, as well as so many other things within the space of science. So yes, this episode is a little bit about the science, but how it affects us directly, and also what the FSHD Society and what the volunteers within our community are doing and helping raise the money so that we can do these things, pay for these things, grants and so forth. And that's all within this episode. So no more about me. It's all about you and this great episode with Lucienne. So sit back and enjoy. And thanks for listening. This is the FSHD Straight Talk podcast. Hi, everyone. I've got some exciting news for you from the FSHD community. If you've ever felt the unpredictability of FSHD or wish there was more accurate research and information out there, and I know you have, then listen up. I'm thrilled to tell you about Better Life FSHD, a groundbreaking new research platform from the FSHD Society that's changing the game for those of us living with FSHD. Better Life is your one-stop hub for tracking symptoms, accessing personalized resources like articles and videos relevant to you. And the best part, as you take surveys and track your symptoms, you provide FSHD researchers with better data to understand this complex, understudied disease. And a better understanding can lead to faster treatments, something every one of us can get behind. So head over to betterlifefshd.org and join the study. It only takes a minute to get signed up. Together, we can change the future for everyone affected by FSHD. I've done this. It's a simple process. I challenge you to do the same. Again, that's betterlifefshd.org. Now let's get back to the show. So this episode, as we have said, we have the Chief Science Officer of the FSHD Society. Lucienne Ronco is here. You've probably seen some of her works within the FSHD Society already. I know I found some videos out there, like her quick interview or conversation with Mark Stone and so forth. So I definitely want people to not do it now, but when we're done, go ahead and find more on Lucienne. So thank you for taking some time to be here with us, and welcome. And one of the first questions I think I have is, I always kind of like to start with the foundational. I'm sure there's a lot of people in our community that know who you are, know what you do for our community when it comes to the science, the complications, right? That I've always been told, make sure that you're not the smartest person in the room. In this case, that is definitely the case, even though we're not in the same room, but we kind of are. And I think that is the fact with our community. Like, we want to have the top people helping us out. So I guess a little bit of yourself, or maybe your background, and as you kind of build up to get to where you are with us.
Yeah. Thank you for your invitation to talk with you, to talk on your podcast. I really am looking forward to it. I told my son I was on your podcast. He was like, "Is it Joe Rogan? I don't know who it is."
Oh, no, I'm not.
That's- So I live outside of Boston, and I grew up in the Pocono Mountains in Pennsylvania. And I attended Tufts University here, actually, and did my PhD at UCLA in biological chemistry. And after that, I actually had an option to come back here to Boston to Harvard Medical School. And that's where I did my postdoctoral training. So I trained for 6 years at Harvard Medical School. And then I had an opportunity to decide to do more applied science or more academic science. And I chose the applied route, which means I joined Pfizer, actually, pharmaceuticals, and I worked for them for 2 years. And then I went to AstraZeneca, worked on oncology because that's where I'd done all my training for a decade. And by the time I was done there, I had become the global director for all of the translational work, meaning that as we run our clinical trials and cancer studies, how do we know if we've been successful? Do we inhibit the target? Do we modify the disease? And so I was responsible for helping each project team set up a clinical trial that would answer those questions. Do we have a biomarker? How do we measure the disease? So those were the kinds of things that I was trained in and learned in and helped Pfizer deliver over the course of that decade. And then I was very interested in joining some biotechs because pharma is phenomenal. They teach you so much. And I was ready to move into new spaces and new areas. And I went from oncology to autoimmune diseases and inflammatory diseases. I went back to academia for a while for the Broad Institute, which is a Harvard MIT institute, and worked there on rare diseases. And that's actually how I ended up at Fulcrum. I worked on rare kidney disease at the Broad. And then I saw that Fulcrum was hiring and building a new team in rare diseases and mononuclear disease, protein-driven diseases. So like DUX4 is the
Mm,
driving protein for FSHD. They wanted to find monogenetic diseases. And that's when I made the transition back into industry to join Fulcrum. And I joined them just as they started to build. So I think
mm,
I was, number 10 or something like that in Fulcrum. So I was there from the very beginning.
mm.
And
That's excellent.
yeah, it was a lot of fun, and I got to help the team select FSHD as an area that
Mm,
we wanted to work in. It was a beautiful time to join Fulcrum and work on FSHD because the geneticists and the clinicians who had been working on the disease for a decade were just at that point where they'd really defined DUX4 as the driver of the
mm,
disease, and it gave us a real area to work in as we developed a new therapy.
mm. And then, so how long then were you at Fulcrum, did you say?
I was there for 5 years. I
5
was
years.
there until we ended the phase 2 Redux 4 study.
Okay. And the word that kind of stuck out to me a little bit was select. Your group selected when you were there, FSHD. Like, what does that process look like? Why did you decide on FSHD?
Yeah, there were quite a number, maybe 5
Mm,
monogenetic diseases that we considered, meaning diseases driven by the faulty, either the expression or a mutation or a change in a single gene that affected a single protein that drove the disease.
mm,
And when you're in industry, you can never put all your eggs in one basket. You can't believe that you are going to identify a useful novel therapeutic in any one disease. So you often are working in 4 or 5
mm-hmm,
areas at the same time. So with Fulcrum, we were working in neurological diseases, neuromuscular diseases, neurodevelopment diseases, and we looked to see where we had the best opportunity to really help patients and to really bring a molecule forward. And FSHD, with the discovery of Losmapam Mod, was the first best new therapeutic that we identified.
and that definitely that drug name, right, is ringing bells in everybody's minds, and
Right.
the process of that. It went all the way up to phase 3.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's usually hopeful. Am
It's
I right
usually
in
very
that?
helpful. In fact, we had very good data from the phase
Mhm,
2 study, which was a smaller study than the phase 3 study, that suggested that we could have an impact on muscle function. We could have an impact on muscle imaging by MRI. We had an impact on patient-reported outcomes. Patients felt better. And the phase 2 was randomized,
mhm.
double-blind, placebo-controlled, so it was the best type of study you could run, which gave us very good reason and optimism that we might see a similar effect in the phase 3.
Yeah, there was hope. I mean, I
So,
have the disease myself, and I thought, oh, this is at least they're on the track of something.
yeah,
Um, Felt like the floor kind of fell out from a lot of us. I'm sure you were included, maybe you more than most, being in the trenches with it from
yeah,
the beginning, knowing that it didn't work.
yeah.
So how was that? You weren't with Fulcrum at that time, and then you get this news, correct? So,
That's right. So I had been asked by Mark Stone to help the society last December. So I've been with the society as the chief scientific
hmm,
officer for a little more than a year. And so when the data came, the announcement came from Fulcrum, I was already working with the society as the chief scientific officer. And honestly, I kind of broke down and cried because
yeah,
the data had just been so strong.
hmm,
There were a lot of reasons to be optimistic, and we expected that we would have something that was very safe and could be taken orally. So it's very easy to take, and that would have a positive benefit on muscles and on muscle function, and perhaps in delaying the progression of the disease. So to get this data from Fulcrum was very heartbreaking, and
yeah,
for us as the developers, but also for our commitment to the patients and
hmm,
for our anticipation that we'd have something that was useful. And now that I'm working with the society, and the reason I was so happy that Mark invited me to take this role is we had developed a lot of knowledge at Fulcrum. We were the first company to run a phase 2 first to run that phase 3 in a large phase 2's international randomized control studies. So we had a lot of knowledge, and I was in a position that I wanted to make sure that knowledge was well used by the community, well used by the society, and that the society could facilitate the value of that knowledge becoming more broad. So even though we had challenging and challenging data from Fulcrum, what Fulcrum has decided to do is to make all of their data available to the society
Oh,
and available to the community. And we've been working with them for the past number of months to transfer all of that data to the society.
mhm.
And to ensure that, because there's a lot of value in placebo data, there's a lot of value perhaps in the treated data. And many companies that are now developing new therapeutics are asking for access to that data to be able to analyze it. And we are working very closely with Avidity, the leader, but also with all of the companies to ensure that we get that data safely and accurately into a database and then have it in a position where it can be well analyzed.
That's not, I mean, is that considered generous or odd, maybe, like to share that kind of data after? Is that normal? Is that customary?
Highly unusual. And
Yeah.
I think it demonstrates a commitment to the community because the community gave so much to
Mhm.
Fulcrum. So the Fulcrum wanted to make sure the data was available to the community. Patients gave biopsies, blood samples, time in MRI machines, repeat visits. It's not easy to be a subject in a clinical trial, and having all that data, and there's a lot of valuable data there.
Mhm.
Having all that data now become available to patients and to researchers is really valuable. And to do it through the society, and our responsible as a society is just to ensure good governance, good questions are asked, and that it's done in a equitable way and a fair way. Yeah.
What part of that data do you think will help if you mentioned the leader, use
Yeah.
that term with avidity. So I guess there's a lot of questions I have off of that word, leader with avidity. But first,
Just
how
the
does that help? Yeah.
Yeah, I just meant leader in timing.
Oh, okay.
That's all I meant.
Okay.
That they're the next
Hmm.
company who will likely go to a phase 3 clinical trial. That's all I meant by that.
Hmm.
They have phase 2 data. They're going to be talking with the FDA. They're going to be making plans to go to their phase 3 trial. They're just the next. There will be likely a whole handful, 4 or 5 companies who are likely to go into clinical trials and likely to go to phase 2 clinical trials in FSHD. So I'm asked now to present to patient groups and to clinicians, and
Hmm.
I speak about optimism at this
Hmm.
point because we have, I'd say, 8 or 9 different mechanistic approaches to turn DUX4 off. And just like I said, one company will not focus on one new therapeutic for their future success. They'll focus on 3, 4, 5. When you work in this disease area, having 3, 4, or 5 different mechanisms to knock down DUX4 puts us in a position where it's likely we're going to find some success. And perhaps one approach is not going to take care of all of DUX4. We might have to combine approaches, and having multiple mechanisms that work at distinct areas of inducing DUX4 or in stabilizing DUX4, a lot of ways we could turn DUX4 off. Having multiple things to combine puts us in a powerful and, in my mind, optimistic position.
It sounds like, right, they're casting a broader net with the 8 and 9
That's
of
right.
options here with that.
That's right.
So,
And so I said Avidity is the
yeah.
leader just because they're going to be the next one into a phase 3 study.
And that is exciting. And I was kind of hoping that you'd say that that's why you said the word leader, because that equals excitement. I know the community. I'm part of that community, and for me, yes, Fulcrum, it's not working out, but sometimes, to me, you learn more by lack of a better term, losing than you do by winning. So, okay, it didn't work, but sharing data, maybe it helps for the next step, or maybe it helps with Avidity as they're kind of just happen to be the leader at this point. Um, with Avidity, what do you feel is promising about what they're doing?
They've showed some preliminary data in a phase 2 study that was suggestive that they can reduce DUX4 levels and that they can enhance muscle function. Having that data together is very valuable. And I've heard from them that they have anticipations of releasing more data at the International Research Congress. That's going to be in June in Amsterdam this summer. And so maybe they'll release it sooner than that, but they have their eye on perhaps on that date. The other thing I'll say is that, yes, when something fails, there's a lot that you can learn. And what we saw from the failure of Losmapam Mod in the REACH study is that the placebo arm, meaning the group of patients who received a pill that looked, like the drug, but wasn't the drug, it was a placebo, they didn't progress at the rate that Fulcrum expected. So therefore, the modest benefit that was shown in the treatment arm with Losmapam Mod couldn't be compared to a loss of function because there was no loss of function overall in that whole population that received the placebo. So there's so much to be learned from that group of patients. What was their muscle function when they started the study? And what was the muscle function when they ended the study? Was the function indicative of progression over a year to a year and a half, or was it not? And we're still learning so much about FSHD. And as you know personally, and as many FSHD patients and family know, it's a very variable disease. And the challenge to clinical trials in this disease and any heterogeneous disease is it's so hard to predict what your placebo group will look like and to ensure that they progress in your primary endpoint during the course of, the 48 weeks or the year and a half that your study is going to run for. And in this case, there was not the progression in the primary endpoint, which was reachable workspace, that Fulcrum had seen in the phase 2 and that the natural history studies had suggested they should see. So one of the reasons that they had to call this a failure of their primary endpoint was that the patients who received the placebo therapy did not progress. So what do we learn from that?
Yeah.
What does Avidity and what do then, Epic and Dyne and Sarepta, because now the other thing that's happened, because it's become very clear that the clinical trial endpoints are becoming more and more clear to clinicians. Larger pharmaceutical companies are becoming more interested in being involved in clinical trials in FSHD, and that benefits everyone. So we heard Sarepta purchased a company. We hear Novartis is interested. We hear Sanofi is interested, and they bring a lot of financial support and strength to larger international clinical trials. And what can we learn? We can learn. So if we break down all the patient characteristics from the Fulcrum Reach study, which patients progressed and which didn't? And what does that tell us about the disease? How does that help us identify patients who will progress during the course of a year to a year and a half to 2 years, over which you could run a phase 3 study? And then it gives us a fair opportunity to look for betterment and efficacy in the treatment arm, because those who were treated with a placebo progressed.
That's almost what you want then. I mean, you don't want it to be this neutral effect happening. You
want to see that's it. In the placebo, that's exactly it. You want to see the natural history or the natural course of the disease ongoing compared to your treated arm. And then you can ask, okay, well, we see a betterment. How much better is it than the placebo treated arm? Yeah.
It's fascinating to me because I know it's a very complicated disease. This, in your expertise, is this one of the more complicated things to figure out in this space that you've seen?
Yes, it is one of the more complicated, and mostly because there's also not a pattern of muscle involvement. Like, we call it facial scapulohumeral muscular dystrophy, but for everyone, it doesn't start always in the face. It doesn't always start in the bicep. It doesn't always start in the leg muscles or the gluteus maximus. It starts at different places, and different muscles progress at different rates. And this was a huge challenge. And so something else that Fulcrum did is we brought whole body MRI into the clinical setting. And the value of that has been, I think, spectacularly huge. And I say that because Fulcrum analyzed the data by clustering the muscles together. But there's other new companies that have brought forward different methods for analyzing that MRI data where they can look at the individual muscles and they can say, well, this muscle progressed over this time and this muscle progressed over this time. And when DUX4 turned on, it looked like, based upon the muscle death or the inflammation that we now see on that muscle, it looks like DUX4 started here and then moved in this direction in this muscle. Is it that way for every FSHD individual in that muscle, or is it different? So when you bring more knowledge into a field like whole body MRI, you give so much opportunity to characterize the disease and suggest better ways to run clinical trials and better ways to even support individuals with physical therapy, with different approaches to support patients. As you could imagine, the whole body MRI is going to be very informative. We in the FSHD Society are even discussing, once we have access to the MRI data that Fulcrum ran, is there an opportunity to provide that data back to patients? Because what you get from that information is, well, on this day at this time, these are the muscles that I had impacted by the disease, and these are the muscles that were still remained healthy. And that, I think, that can give you an approach to managing your disease and to manage your overall well-being with that knowledge.
We've come a long way. I mean, at least in the short time I've been with FSHD Society. Diagnosed when I was 40, kind of jumped in there around then, like 41ish, doing podcasts and so forth, and events for this great group that I've been a part of since. And what was then being told to me, it was like everybody was excited that even DUX4 was found, and then it feels like it's moving fast, but I'm just average guy. I don't know if it is. Do you feel like it's been moving quickly?
Yes, and I've been astounded at the number of companies that have come forward with a number of different approaches to modifying DUX4 and to see the preclinical data and the quality of the data. The other thing that's been very given me hope, and that you have to generate this data in the clinic, but there are companies that have worked in other muscle dystrophies. They've worked in myotonic dystrophy. They've worked in Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, and they found their technology, their approach to modifying a protein to be successful in those diseases. And that gives you a suggestion that as they move into FSHD, they might expect similar success. So having 3 or 4 different companies with a mechanism or with a delivery system, because you have to get your new medicine into muscle with a delivery system that's worked in other muscle dystrophies, gives you optimism and allows you to move more quickly. Because once it's worked in myotonic dystrophy, you know how to apply it in FSHD, and allows you to move relatively rapidly. So I do think that once it became clear that DUX4 was the accepted cause of the disease, things have moved very rapidly.
And that is why I found it was interesting. If we are moving that rapidly, but the disease is that complicated, and so many other pharmaceuticals want to get into this space, it's like, why is all that happening? Why are they so interested, do you think? And so many, and it feels like all of a sudden.
I think that we also needed good measurements of disease progression in the clinic. And we have a number of ways to measure muscle function. Some of them are upper body function, like reachable workspace, which I know many people have been familiar with. We also have lower extremity functions, like the 6-minute walk test or the 10-meter walk run, or there's a stair climb. There's so many ways that have been evaluated in FSHD subjects where we're starting to get a handle on. Whole body MRI has been very valuable, as has our further understanding of muscle functionality by manual muscle testing and by densitometry and by a variety of methods. And I think the reason it's been moving so rapidly, and so many more companies are saying, okay, I'm willing to invest and take the risk of moving into FSHD clinical trials. Is perhaps the risk has been reducing because we've learned so much about how to measure the disease clinically.
So it's not like the first companies coming through the door have done some of this kind of siphoning it better, making it a little
Yes.
more clear. That's
Yes.
logical. I like that. Something logical that I can understand, Lucy.
I love logic.
Clearly, yes. Um, there's this other, part of our community that is also being affected by this disease, and that's that early onset group. And there's this growing concern, and I'd be remiss not to bring it up because, had the support groups, so to speak, of the community there that's represented on this podcast kind of crying out, like, we need to recognize the kids. We need to recognize the younger people.
Yes.
Um, if it's avidity or other um, science coming into the space, is there any of those that are leaning to help target that part of the community that you know of?
Yes. So you may know that there was a European neuromuscular committee or community that came together to specifically generate recommendations for early childhood FSHD.
Mm,
And they have those recommendations. They're out now. There's a lay version, so that's available to non-scientists. And I think the
okay.
scientific version is being written up. We will have some presentation of that in our Congress in June.
Nice.
What I can say is it's very clear FSHD is a continuum of a disease. The disease that affects children early is due to DUX4.
Mhm,
FSHD1 and 2,
mhm,
early or middle or late onset, is all due to DUX4 expression. So a therapeutic that inhibits or reduces DUX4 expression will work in childhood onset patients as well as moderate age as well as late age. It'll work in more severe patients as well as less severe patients.
mm,
And we need to ensure the safety of those medicines across that range of um, ages.
mhm,
And um, we need to run MRI. So that's also something the European Committee said. We need to run MRI in these early onset childhood FSHD individuals.
mm,
And we need to ensure that the biomarkers that have been identified or beginning to be identified in adults can be meaningful and are valuable in childhood disease. So we've made big steps in the past 2 years, I think, in thinking about childhood onset disease.
mm,
And I'll say one other thing. Clinicians around the world realized we didn't have enough information about early onset FSHD. So there are clinicians in Australia who are running MRI, who are running biomarker, who are running immunology analyses on early onset childhood FSHD patients. And the Clinical Trial Research Network, run
mhm,
by Jeff Statlin, CTRN, has also just received a large grant for studies in early onset childhood FSHD, and he will be running natural history studies there. The reason we need to run these natural history studies is, how do you measure muscle function at the same time as the muscle is growing in a developing human,
mhm,
right? So in a young child or in an adolescent child, there's a lot of muscle growth, there's bone growth, there's increase in strength. And so how do we measure the impact of the disease during the development and growth of these muscles? And
mhm,
that's what we must understand. MRI could be very valuable because it doesn't measure strength. You know,
mhm,
it measures
right,
inflammation and edema in liquid coming into muscles, and it tells you, and it measures fat replacement of muscle. And those are measurable and in developing and growing humans. Um, Are there functional tests that are indicative, independent of muscle development and growth? That they're asking those questions. And then finally, do we have circulating markers of disease? Do we have muscle-based markers of disease? Because we know it's due to DUX4. It's very clear it's due to DUX4. If Avidity showed that they can reduce DUX4 with muscle biopsies in adults, if we can reduce DUX4 in muscle biopsies in children, we know we can impact disease. So it's a pretty direct measurement of our ability to impact the disease in the childhood population. So we just within the past year and a half start to have the tools in our hands that allow us to move into an earlier onset population.
That was very hopeful information from what I could hear in what you were saying, and there has been a lot of hope in what you've been saying throughout, but particularly that group. I mean, it hits home, right? It's like, hey, don't mess with our kids, kind of an attitude,
Yeah.
and it's comforting to know that there is things in place to make sure that they're included in that. So they are. So then, early onset, the children, are they being then included in clinical trials then?
And they're not yet. And so there are not things yet in place, but we've
Mhm.
started the natural history studies to understand what
Mhm.
we can measure that's valuable
Okay.
in children. And what I do understand is uh, companies are considering or may have allowing individuals or adolescents of an earlier age into clinical trials. So not waiting till they're 18, but going to an earlier age, maybe 16, maybe 14. So those are
Okay.
considerations that can currently just make a transition for us for those individuals at that age. But the Australian group that I mentioned and the CTRN group have to do a bit of work to
Mm.
say, well, does reachable workspace work in
Mm. Right.
young children or in young adults or in adolescents? What does that rate of progression look like over time? The MRIs are being taken. What about those MRIs over time? So we need probably another few months. And I believe
Oh,
me, when you're a
mhm.
parent and
Yeah.
you have to watch your child live with this disease and be challenged by this disease, you want it to happen right away. But until we know what to measure, we we can't be successful clinically. And
Mhm.
so we need maybe another 8 months, 10 months, 12 months to really, and I can't tell you exactly how much time we
Right.
need. I'm just saying we need time to understand what we can measure in children in childhood onset to be able to ensure we can be successful clinically.
Mhm. And of course, all that entails the safety, right, throughout. We don't want this to be
Safety
at
is
risk as we
essential.
go along. Right. It's essential. Can't
Yes,
just go
yes.
headstrong into this. I mean, that's not good either. Because and I feel like sometimes the community gets to that point, like the hell with the consequences type attitude. Like, let's just do this. Just stick me or with whatever. I'll take whatever pill. But it's just not that simple, is it?
No, and you certainly don't want adverse consequences of something that
Yeah.
has been well studied, especially in a young individual, but in any individual,
Right.
honestly, a 40-year-old, a 60-year-old, you want to ensure that you know the risk.
Hmm.
We can only understand the risk of a novel therapeutic by running phase 2, phase 3 clinical studies and understanding what happens in those populations of patients. And then we can say, okay, we think the risk of this is 1% or 5% or 10%. And then we do that risk benefit. We don't do the risk benefit analysis. The FDA and the
Hmm.
European regulators, do
Right.
the risk benefit analysis and say, yes, the benefit outweighs the risk, and then we go forward.
With the connection that FSHD Society, the community of people that go to fundraising events, run these walk-in rolls, when we're recording this coming up in the end of this month here in January is going to be in the beginning of February is going to be a volunteer leadership,
Yep.
conference. They come together and all this science is happening. How does that all blend? Like, is this money directly needed for this? I guess give us your rah rah. We need you for, and this is why.
I can give it. I don't even have to like make up my rah rah.
Nice,
So,
nice.
so we know that reducing DUX4 is going to impact this disease. We can see on the very near horizon that companies are coming forward with methods to reduce DUX4 that we believe are going to be successful because they've demonstrated success either already in FSHD or in other muscle dystrophies. That told the society that we have to start ensuring, no, we have to continue ensuring that the clinicians, the patients, and the payers, the insurers, are ready to receive a molecule that looks like it's demonstrating success. How do we do that? We have to ensure the neurologists are trained. We have to ensure patients are tested. They actually have the genetic test that shows that they have FSHD. We have to register those patients. And so the society has put Better Life, this new patient registry, and it's like a patient portal to track their own disease in place. We have to ensure that there are clinics that can run these phase 2 and phase 3 clinical trials because they're not easy and there's a challenge and they have to be trained. And so we've seen these needs and we've started working in those areas. And the monies that we raise for the society will benefit those activities. The other thing that I want to say is we're continuing to fund basic science research as we have in the past. But this year, the funding that I, together with the therapeutic accelerator team, decided to fund. So once we have a molecule that reduces DUX4, what else do we need? We may need to help understand how the immune system, because we know there's a strong immune component to this disease. At what point does the immune system recognize the disease? At what point does the recognition of the disease either benefit or cause harm to the muscle? What kind of harm? And what are the mechanisms for that harm? Can we block the harm of the immune system and can we facilitate the benefit? So one area we requested that scientists come and give us proposals was in immunology. Tell us how you would study. And as I was telling you, the Australian group is studying MRI and functional endpoints, but they're also studying the immune system in youth, in children, and in young adults with FSHD. Does it look the same as the immune system in adults? And so there's many ways you can approach studying the immune system. We got some very nice grants that propose to do that work. Then we have one other area that we requested grants in, and that's genetics. It turns out we know about FSHD1 and FSHD2. And FSHD2, there are mutations in genes for proteins that regulate DUX4 expression. So if those proteins are mutated, DUX4 can get expressed, and I won't go into the whys. But we know that we don't know all of those proteins. We know genetically, because we have exceptional geneticists working in this area, that there's other mutated proteins and we don't know what they are. And they could be proteins that impact youth. They could be in a unique way and facilitate that early onset. They could be proteins that work together with known proteins and facilitate that early onset. And once we have more knowledge and we are in a position to really know that, and we have the technology to sequence the whole genomes of individuals with early onset versus later onset. So we have ways of answering those questions. And so we asked for grants around that, and we got those grants.
Beautiful.
And then we asked for biomarker grants. And the reason we did was because all of a sudden, Avidity has said, we found a blood-based biomarker that is modulated as we modulate DUX4 and as muscle function changes. And they're telling us that they're going to release that information sometime before March or April of this year. That's great. What additional work do we need on that biomarker or on additional biomarkers to help make our clinical trials more successful? And so we put out a request for additional biomarker work. And the funding of those basic science research projects comes from the money that we raise as a society.
Nice. Love it. That's good.
Yeah.
You know, right? I mean, it brings it all together, because that is definitely one of the common things that I hear when people are like, okay, this is great. FSHD Society does this stuff. They got all these people. Why do they need all these people? Right? They need paid staff, blah, 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 blah. And I've always said, well, you know what? And I work at a nonprofit. And I said, don't you want all the attention of these great people with all their expertise working on your disease 40 plus hours a week, whatever they're doing? Or
Yeah.
do you want them to like, no, I got this on the part time? That's why the community, or the FSHD Society rather, is so strong and has the people they do to help do exactly what you just said.
Yes, and if you have expertise in the area in which you're trying to deliver, it makes you so much more able to deliver value and value quickly and really engage. So, we have June Kinoshita, who has known
Mhm.
the community for so many years, and her deep understanding of the community is invaluable to us. We have Amanda Hill, who is a lot
Mhm.
of experience in understanding her, and has a family member with the
Mhm.
disease, and so has a real commitment, but she's the one who is behind Better Life and getting this registry going. We have, so we do have quite a number of individuals, but these people are working.
Yes, they
and
are.
and they're
Yeah.
bringing value, as you said,
Yeah.
they're bringing value to the community, they're bringing value to the hard work that we're doing. And you can't do this work without, and I guess the other thing I'll say is different groups have different mandates.
Mhm.
So I love the Friends of FSHD. And they have a very specific mandate. They fund grants and they do fundraising mostly around those kinds of things. We have Solve that is funded by a different way, and their goal is to really accelerate companies that are, just doing that breakthrough into the clinical trials. That's great. And now we have the FSHD Society, and the society is saying, our responsibility is to the community to ensure that new molecules can be tested broadly. That means clinicians are trained, patients have genetic tests, neurologists can recognize the disease, and that once a molecule has been approved, that payers see value.
Mhm.
And how do we demonstrate that? And so the society is positioning itself to be able to help with those very challenging transitions from, phase 2 success to an early phase 3 success to an approved and paid for new medicine.
Mhm.
And those are not easy transitions to make. And we needed to step into that area, and that takes resource and that takes people.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. It sure does. It brings us full circle of how the growth has happened and why it's happening is because of the people.
Yeah.
As it's all grown. And I know can't say it enough. The community is always impatient, rightfully so. But I
Yeah.
think the progression of the disease is scary, but I think the progression of the help and what's coming is starting to equal it, in my opinion.
Mhm.
Like so there is hope. So it leaves me then to kind of like the last question here. Where do you think we are going to be? And I know this is going to be tough to kind of gauge, but where do you think we're going to be in, let's say, 5 years? A year might be, I think you've kind of explained it. Hey, we're kind of here by April. Maybe we're kind of here with certain researches and clinical trials and so forth. But what do you think things look like in a jump of 5 years?
I think we should really have seen some clinical successes that
Nice.
suggest that we can impact this disease. I
Hmm.
also think we're going to know a lot more about, and so DUX4. We're going to see clinical successes in reducing DUX4. That doesn't mean we're going to have approved therapies in our hand. That means that we're going to know how to reduce it, and we're going to know how to measure the disease clinically, and we'll know where we need to be going. And let's hope that that means that we have approved therapies, but it certainly will mean we know how to do it. And sorry, I was going to make a point. Um, I, I think we're also going to have a real handle on all this natural history data. We'll have understood the Fulcrum data very fully. We'll be able to use the CTRN and the Australian group. The other
Hmm.
thing that I haven't mentioned at all is that in India and in China, there are committed neurologists to fully, and in Japan, to fully understanding FSHD in those countries. And as we bring more genetic diversity into our understanding of this disease, it gives us the ability to say, well, what's consistent with European, individuals versus Japanese versus Indian versus Chinese. And it
Mhm.
helps us better understand the disease and continue to find the causes. I know where I was going, which is the immune system. So once we have clarity on how we can reduce SOX4, I hope we have clarity on the mechanisms of the immune system and how it drives or inhibits the disease.
Mm.
The other thing that people are working a lot on are how do we take muscle stem cells? I don't mean take them physically into our hands, but how do we
Mhm.
understand how muscle stem cells can help regenerate a muscle?
Mm.
It's still very opaque, very hazy. We really still are at the beginning stages of we know they exist. We know
Mm.
they're essential. We just don't understand how we can help turn those into therapeutics. I think in 5 years, we will know how to think about muscle stem cells. Okay, and so let's say 50% of a muscle has been transitioned to fat or has muscle volume has been lost
Yeah.
in my bicep. Is it possible for me to help regenerate a portion of that muscle with a muscle stem cell? I think
Mm.
we'll have knowledge by 5 years' time to say, yeah, we do know how to do that. We can
Mm.
isolate those muscle stem cells and we can do X, Y, Z, or 1, 2, 3 on them that turns them into something that can possibly help rebuild that muscle. I don't think we're going to be able to rebuild all muscles in the human
Right.
body, but if a patient were to say, really, I need this one functioning so I can walk, or this one functioning
Mhm.
so I can brush my teeth, or something like this, I think we'll be in a position to understand the biology of muscle regeneration well enough to perhaps do something about it.
Awesome. That is a fantastic future, if you ask me. That's great. That's great. Lucienne, it's been amazing talking with you, listening to your explanations of all this, making the guy that I'll definitely admit, I think I flunked every single science class I have ever had, almost. But you made it very simple for me. I almost get anxiety when they're like, "Okay, we're gonna have the chief science officer." I'm like, "Okay, we're gonna do this. Okay, here we go." But you made it so easy, educational for all of us, and hopeful. And I could feel your sense of urgency, your commitment, your emotional, empathy towards the attack of this.
Yeah.
Very grateful that you shared, yeah, that you were emotional about that failure, and maybe it'll be a fail forward moment. I know sometimes you don't know that until way into the future, sometimes, but it might
Yeah.
be.
Yeah, honestly, I've had a lot of other companies representatives come and say, you guys really helped show us the way, helped us think it was doable, and that just makes me feel okay.
Yeah,
We did valuable work,
yeah,
and that fee is going to feed forward, and now we're going to have access to the data through the society, and that valuable work is going to feed forward also. So, yeah,
yeah.
I'm
Job well done,
oh,
then.
oh,
Job
fine.
well done.
Thank you.
Excellent.
All right,
Thanks, Lucienne. Thanks for joining us. You
you're
take
welcome.
care, and hopefully we'll talk and have you on in the future and give you some more exciting news. That's what I
Okay,
want to hear.
wonderful. Great. Nice to
Awesome.
speak with you.
Of
Thanks.
course. Yep.
All
Bye
right, bye.
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 So that is Lucienne Ronco. She is the chief science officer. If you haven't noticed, yes, in the past we've had other chief science officers that have been with the FSHD Society and talking about certain things. And in those viewpoints, in those vantage points, it's been more about a different side of the science. I think it's been more about discovery. And here it's really more about discovering treatments, even more so. Key takeaways, right? There's so many because it is science. And I'm sure there's going to be a side of the people listening to this or watching this saying, "Yeah, but I don't hear, a cure." It's like I get it, guys, I can't reach either. I can't walk well either. I'm starting to fall more. I get it. Like the hourglass keeps going, right? It's like you keep losing the function. And when I said 5 years to Lucienne, uh, and I can probably imagine some of you thought, "Oh man, 5 years." Me too. But what other choice do we really have? Right? We could be negative and like stew in it, and that's not going to make a cure or treatment come any faster. We have to be diligent, do our part. I'm not a scientist, but I'm going to do what I can with the skills I have to help. And I think we have to continue to do that and just continue to overcome every single thing that we can to make sure that those things happen. Last thing I want to say, because this is going to be one of the first episodes aired for the new year. And I know people go through New Year's resolutions and they usually don't work. In fact, 2 weeks after, right, New Year's, they call it Fail Friday, I think, or Quit Friday Quitters or something like that. On that like second Friday after the new year, people just stop. It's like ridiculous amount. Like over half of people stop with their resolutions. By the time January's done, is over, right? And I've kind of bought into this frame of mind, this mindset that you think of just one word for the year that represents what you're trying to do. If it's a change or maybe it's a state of mind, something to make you more positive, I think you need to use that exercise. Then in this case, those that are negative or feeling down about the fact that Fulcrum failed, but man, the future just seems so far away. Treatment seems just so impossible. Have we gotten anywhere? Find the word that's kind of representing that can make you feel more positive this year. It makes you feel that you can make a difference. There's no such thing as a small piece. Every small piece makes a huge right piece. It's if everybody in the world gave $1, you've heard it before. Imagine how many things that we could do and help. My word for the year that I chose after thinking about it was overcome. I've had so much loss over the last years, and even this past year, either people that have passed away or people have just simply walked out of my life. And for whatever reason, those things happen, good, bad, or otherwise, but we have to overcome. If it's a personal thing, if it's FSHD, it does pile on. My word is overcome. And that's what I have to do this year, overcome those things. For you, I suggest taking some time and thinking about what does that one word mean. You can Google it. There is some science behind simplifying a resolution, a change of mindset, just by one word. And that's, I think, my challenge for you guys. And I think the one word that came out of this, it came up in previous episodes. Is it hope? Is it pursue? I don't know, but it's in there and it's not negative, because I can be hopeful for the future from not just myself, but of generations to come. We have to eliminate this disease, and these are the paths that go forward. If you want to get in touch with me here on the show, you want to express some opinions of this episode, I'd love to hear it, or ideas for other episodes. FSHD Radio at FSHDSociety.org is the way to do that. I'd love to hear from you. I've heard from so many guests in the past. We've had guests on here because of those emails. Keep them coming. We have a fresh new year here that we're walking into on FSHD Straight Talk, and we need guests. We need people to share their story. And we've drifted a little bit into science in this episode. Trust me, we always continue to bring the community in, and I want to hear from you. So please do that. Email me, fshdradio@fshtsdsociety.org. Follow the show, listen, share, all those things. Spotify, I'm pretty sure on Google Podcasts, and pretty much any place you can find a podcast, you'll find us. If you tell other people in the community and share on your social, we would appreciate it. And to stay connected and to help drive the machine forward, even if my gear on the machine driving it forward is tiny, at least we're all trying to go in the same direction. So thanks for being here, listening, watching to the show, and you've been listening to FSHD Straight Talk. Take care.